sounds.
0%.
Yes,
Who are
0%.
the very basics? So you are definitely you.
Yeah, sure.
How about you?
I speak Swedish, so
Oh, well, you're an expert then.
yeah.
To us others. How many have learned a little bit but not? Just
Very little bit.
You looked at it. All right. It's good to know where you are in the room. We can probably get you the answers that you're looking for. Some of you will probably be inspired. And some of you will probably be leaving the room in rejection and how horrible the language is. But to some, there is a beauty. I think maybe most of us are here. Not sure. It's always interesting with these kind of small, obscure languages, how many friends come in and say that. That's probably about it. Alright, so let's get started. Oh, Andrew, I have your book here, by the way. I don't know.
Keep it if you need to.
Alright, okay. If I need to draw on it, this is the colloquial Danish. I don't know if you're familiar with the series, but it's actually quite good. I was just, Andrew approached it, and I just took a look at it just to see, is it any use for non-Danish speakers to learn from? And it's actually quite good. I only found one problem, and I put a little note in the same but let's get started. When I first saw the Polyglot conference, I knew that I was giving a talk. I didn't know what I was going to talk about, but it's obviously natural to do in Danish because that's my native language. I've been there for 25 years. So, if anything, I should know something about that. There's a problem in the sense that people who are brought up in a language, they don't really study it. They don't really get to know deep aspects. They kind of sort of just grow up with it, so it's natural to them. So in a sense, it could probably have been better if you had someone really good at Danish who had studied it for a long time to talk about it. But since that no such person presented himself, I'm here, and anything that I say are kind of from a practical standpoint. I'm not a linguist. I am studying at the university in English, but I have no formal education in Danish or anything. So it's kind of a low-tech approach in that. It's all practicality. And if I give you an answer that does sound a little bit like a linguist might say, it might not be anyway. So I'm taking it as fact, as hard fact. Exciting. The technicality is good. Alright, and the presentation itself, if you read the little abstract, is about pronunciation. And the reason, some of you might not know this, some of you are experiencing Danish for the first time today maybe, and the reason that I chose the pronunciation is because if you have any idea about Danish, you're going to immediately say that it sounds weird, or I thought you were Irish, or that's what we get a lot sometimes.
Yeah, because I have never heard or studied anything about Danish, but it sounds very familiar to Norwegian.
Of course, yes. I will get into that in a minute and definitely do that. But I chose to do the pronunciation. Danish basics in an hour. It's not a lot of time, so I focused on this one thing, speaking it. And by the end of it, hopefully you will be speaking a little bit of Danish, and we can have some fun with that. But before we start, I just wanted to take a second to introduce myself. I'm Broholm, a very Danish name, I guess. It's not very common. Usually in Danish we have the patronymy like son, like in Sweden you have Eriksson, for instance. In Danish it becomes Eriksen, that's an E in the end. But sometimes you're also named after places and old castles and stuff. And mine is a region on Freedom, Middle Island, and that's why I got it. As I said, I'm a student in English, minoring in German. It's very much about languages, and not in Danish, but I could have chosen that. Here I am. Born and raised Danish, as I said. And this year I actually started learning languages. And of course I've been learning German and English through school and everything. But actually seriously starting to learn languages is only something I started with this year. So this is kind of my first public appearance as well. And it's so exciting to be here and see every one of you. I've seen a little bit online, and some of you I've talked to. And it's really great fun. And I really think that the people who are organizing this deserve a lot of credit. It's really a great first event. And there's some stuff I'm doing, it's not that important, nobody knows about that, but it's good to put that in. And here are the goals for the presentation. And let me just put all of them actually. Let's So we'll talk a little bit about what Danish is, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it, because this is something you can find in any book. It's something that will be all over the internet. That's going to be easy for you to find out. Then I'm going to give some opinions on why to learn it. And I'll give my personal views and what I've heard from other people, because obviously that was never relevant for me. up in Denmark, you know, I couldn't choose. And then I'll give a 5-minute grammar crash course. I won't time it, but hopefully I can make it quite short, so it doesn't bore you too much. And again, grammar is something I feel like you can always look up in a book. Always go to some of these books that they produce, and you can see it very organized. If I had to do a Danish grammar course in an hour, it would be so condensed anyway that you probably forget half of it. So I'm doing a very quick introduction just to kind of wake your appetite for how Danish grammar works, and then hopefully that will inspire you to go further with it. You know, I don't expect you to become fluent speakers after this talk, but maybe if some of you were like, it sounds kind of interesting, I'll pick it up, then I would have done my job correctly. So, and then we'll speak some, of course. I don't know if any of you have been to Denmark and you've been attacked by Danes who say Broholm med fløde, or something. Maybe some of you heard it. And that's what we're going to say today. So when you go to Denmark, you go prepared. So we'll break the phrase down, and then we'll look at the different sounds, why it's hard, and why we pester the foreigners with it. But we'll come to that once I've just introduced the dialects and the pronunciation. And then after, there will be a Q&A. So it's also, I don't plan to use the full time, so that if there's any concept in Danish or culture or anything you have on your mind, feel free to ask that at the end of the lesson, and I can answer it. Because I don't know what your interests are and what you're interested in knowing about Danish, but I'll try to fill out 3/4 of it, and then you have the floor, and you can ask me to say anything as well if you want. So let's look at a little bit of Danish language, the danske sprog, and Scandinavia, of course. If you were at Victor's talk earlier, you might have seen a little bit of the dynamics that were between Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish. And they're so similar, in fact, that without ever having heard a person speak Swedish or Norwegian, a Danish person can understand a lot of it, to the extent that you can definitely have a conversation. I mean, we had a few conversations in dining hall already, where it was, Victor the Norwegian, then me, and then I think, what was it, Per?
I forgot.
Yeah, there was a Swedish guy there as well.
But they are distinct languages.
Very distinct. They're as official as the language can get. And the reason they're so similar, of course, has a history in the kind of the conquest ages, the history of, they used to belong under the same name, they used to conquer each other. Like, you kind of don't like the Swedes in like a joking manner because they once attacked us in the military. There were these great rivalries, and that was way back. And of course, therefore, the languages kind of were of similar descent, and therefore also similar structure today. And Denmark, of course, as you might expect, is spoken in Denmark mostly, but there are actually also minorities around the world, interestingly. I found one in Canada, which I was a little bit surprised about, but there you go. And also other places, mostly particularly in Germany, because when there was the Second World War, the border between Denmark and Germany was actually moved several times. First, when we were conquered by the Germans, the border, of course, moved up, so Denmark lost soil. And then when the Germans were conquered and lost the war, they gave us a lot back. And then eventually they were like, nah, you probably got too much. So politically we agreed on somewhere in between. And the effect is that in northern Germany, there's a lot of Danish speakers who are more Danish than German, at least in language-wise. And that's why you have this minority. Children in schools there have both languages equally, and it's a very interesting society actually because of that.
I have a question about the three of them. If all of the three are very similar, how can you tell the difference between those? For example, you are speaking Swedish, or then
right.
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Do you mind waiting with the questions until after? Because I might answer that during the talk. So
okay.
So just keep a mental note, and then I'll get back to all the questions you might have. The thing that's really good about the Danish language, and something you can say kind of easily, is that the grammar is quite simple. If you know English, the construction is quite similar. And in terms of grammar, I'll get into the grammar, of course, in the 5-minute grammar lesson. But it's very simple, and therefore, some languages are quite heavy on grammar, like Russian and German, and that puts some people off learning it. But that's the total opposite of Danish. It's quite easy to get into, and you get your head around the rules quite easily, actually. So that's a big plus. The problem, of course, is that it's impossible to pronounce. And actually, even the Danish people have problems. I'll talk a little bit about dialects in a second, but if I was to talk to a person from southern Jutland, it's kind of the big part of Denmark, then they can actually speak in a way that I don't understand half of what they're saying, which is quite impressive considering it's the same language and we live 200 kilometers apart. But I'll get back to that now. I'll even let you hear some of that, and you can make your own decision as to what it sounds like. But it's very interesting. And this dynamic is something that other people have noticed as well. I'm going to show you a little film from Norway about this. But let's talk about why. You are all language learners, I'm assuming, or at least language enthusiasts. So you've probably heard some of these whys before. But these are kind of my personal take on why I would learn Danish, but I didn't know it. First of all, it's different. If you talk only about Scandinavian languages, most people outside of Europe learn Swedish. It seems to be the most popular one. I'm not sure exactly what the dynamic is, but if you learn Danish, you're doing something that not a lot of other people are doing. That's always interesting, and you can provide your own take. And I mean, every time you learn a language, you gain something culturally. So why not try and get the Danish culture in there? And of course, it's challenging because of the way it's pronounced. And the literature and culture is actually quite big in Denmark. I don't know what it is about small countries, but it seems like the smaller the country, almost the more important the literature and the culture becomes. I mean, I'm sure some of you have heard about Hans Christian Andersen, the fairy tales, translated to just about every language imaginable. I'm sure it's in Klingon and probably also in Esperanto, some of them, they're quite short, but if you want to read them in the original language, which is of course a little bit older, Danish is about 100 years old, 150, so it would be, for a Dane, not super straightforward, but you would understand it easily. You just couldn't understand every single word. You would understand it. And culture-wise, we have a very rich culture. It's very interesting, and I can't really stand here and describe it. You kind of have to experience it, but it's just interesting. We have a lot of music festivals. We're a very liberal country. We have a lot of arts and crafts, and there's just a lot going on. A nice vibe. If you go to Copenhagen, there's a lot of initiatives in that kind of area. So, and music, of course, we hosted the Eurovision. If anyone's interested in that, I'm not a big fan of it, but it was in Denmark last, and that means we won the year before. But I mean, it's probably all big anyway. So that's if you're interested into that. Of course, there's business relations and hygge, which is something I just talked about. That it's not possible to convey here. You have to experience it, and you can translate loosely to something like comfortable situation, or like cozy is the English kind of way of saying it, but it means more. It's like it's not kind of an emotion. It's kind of like a state of mind, and you must really go to Denmark to see what that means. It's also a little bit overrated, but as a Dane in another country, I kind of have to hype it up a little bit. So, but yeah, hygge is a big thing, and if you ask Danes about it, I mean, if you imagine the snow is howling down outside. You're sitting in front of a nice warm fireplace, you have a dog curled up at your feet, and you have a hot chocolate. I think that could be close to the hygge feeling. And it's not translated directly, of course. And I added some of the translations just for, if you're interested in how the language is written. But yeah. Oh yeah, this is a very important point, of course. And it's a funny dynamic because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Norwegians go to Sweden to buy alcohol, and the Swedes go to Denmark, and we go to Germany. So it's like you go all the way down, and there's actually a big culture in Denmark where you take your trailer, hitch it up to your car, and you drive down to Germany and just fill it up with cheap beer and coke and candy. Because in Denmark the sugar prices or taxes on sugar are so high that it actually makes financial sense to drive a long way and just buy in bulk, of course. But it's actually quite nice. And it's Danish beers, which is probably the craziest thing. So we go from Denmark to Germany to buy the Danish beers. But okay, I've been in London on a pub drinking Danish beer, and it's half the price of pubs in Denmark. So yeah, there's something wrong about the prices. That's probably a warning I should give. It is expensive to be in Denmark, really expensive. Alright, so that was a little introduction into Danish. I hope it hasn't turned you off too much. Maybe this will. A funny thing about the alphabet, I guess that's a good way to start a language. How's the alphabet like? Well, we use the Roman alphabet, just like Swedish and Norwegian. And the interesting thing is the letters that you see here, C, Q, X, and Z, are actually not Danish. So if that appears in a Danish text, it's because it's a long word. So that's a good indicator. Like a word like zebra is the same in Danish, but it's obviously from which I was, and the same with the X, Q, and Z. So we use a lot more vowels probably in our language. And I guess the argument there is that we have 3 extra vowels that isn't present in English. And when you look at them, there are two of them that you will know if you know German. I don't know, how many of you know German? Most of you. Okay, a little bit, okay. So you know the umlaut, right? Okay, well that's enough, that's enough. So the first letter is E, and it's kind of like a umlaut in German. It's kind of like the same sound. But in Danish, like so many other languages, a letter doesn't represent a sound, which I'm sure you know. It just represents many different sounds, and depending on the word and the construction and everything. And this isn't something I'm going to go terribly into, but in a book like this, they would explain it. And if you go on Wikipedia, search for a Danish IPA, which is the International Phonetics Alphabet, they would list all the sounds. The problem with the sounds is that if you look at a book like this, and I can just give an example, like the problem is the sounds are not translatable. So if I just a few of the vowel sounds, listen to the wording of this. Very much like, similar to, like, not unlike, slightly more, similar to. So there's no direct translation to the sounds, meaning that you kind of have to learn all of them by heart. And that's what makes it hard. And there are maybe 5 different ways of saying E in a word. And that's why you have to learn it. Let's skip ahead a little bit, but that's okay. The 3 letters we got there, A, and you can kind of see the construction that it's an A and it has an E attached. And the Ö is just an O with a line through it. And this is an A with a, what do you call it, a circle. So you can see where they come from. And if you don't have a Danish keyboard and you need to write in Danish, you can always write these as AE, like this, not connected, but AE, and then OE, and then AA. And Danish people do this all the time if they're traveling, or some phones they might not have the Danish alphabet, the Danish keyboard, and maybe they don't want to change and mess with settings or something. So if you see that, that's because they don't have the actual letters. And these letters are kind of new forms. It used to be always the double letter kind of thing. Sentence structure, as I mentioned, is similar to English, with a little difference is that we have 2 genders, neuter and common. And again, if you know German, you have 3 genders, and a lot of other languages have genders. The interesting thing is when you have made the article, it's in front like in English, in the indefinite, et hus. That means a house. But if you have to make the definite, you just move it to the back. Comes huset. That literally means the house. And that's very simple, so when you see this way, that becomes that. And there are very few rules. If you know German, they usually have all these kind of rules. If it ends in E, it's probably feminine, and if it ends in chen, it's probably neuter, and so on and so forth. But in Danish, it's a little bit more difficult. There aren't that many rules, so you kind of just have to learn them. So I would highly suggest when you're doing vocabulary in Danish, either through Anki or Memrise, that you learn the gender at the same time as the word. Like, don't learn that house is hus, learn that house is it hus. Because then you can always make it definite, just put it at the back. And the same goes for German. If you're studying German, always remember the genders. I made this mistake in school 8 years ago, and I don't know any genders now because I just learned the word for word meaning. And now I just guess, and German people are like, well, you speak very well German, but you have no idea about genders. So it's a problem. So now I'm relearning the genders, and trust me, it's easier to do it the first time around than the second time. It's hard to make it stick. And this is the other case that you will see. A, B, and then again it goes at the end, it becomes bilen. So that's fairly simple, I think, compared to like German and other things that change a lot of the sentence structures.
What would be the difference between a neuter and a common?
There's no difference. It's just a name for the gender.
Okay.
So the common contains both male and female, masculine and feminine, and the neuter is just the above. But it doesn't actually carry that meaning. And the problem with these is that when you bring in a loan word, a new word like a computer or new technical words that are added to the dictionary, there's often a dispute of what the right gender is. Because the gender in Danish doesn't matter. If you say in hus, we're still all going to understand you. So don't worry about the gender at the same time. But if you want to sound correct, obviously get the gender. But to me, that's just when you have like a word like internet. Obviously, you can't say a internet, but let's say in computer, for instance, generally accepted as in computer, but any kind of foreign loanword that is new, like selfie, for instance, entered the Danish dictionary, I'm quite sure. Is it in selfie or it's selfie? It's weird for us Danish people to find out, so I can only assume how trouble it would be for new learners to get this system. And here's some good news. Just going to take the question at the end.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, let's say we forget what the gender is,
Right.
even if we aim
No
to
problem.
remember. Do you know if there's kind of statistical probability that you can just kind of guess?
I would go for in generally.
In.
Yeah, it's a little bit more common, I think. But I don't have any facts to back this up. I just think it sounds nicer.
Okay.
So if you said in wrong, I can live with it more than if you said it wrong, because it kind of makes it up.
It's more hygge.
Like I say, I think in Swedish, just from speaking
Yeah.
it, all the new loan words tend to go to M.
Yeah,
Right.
That's great.
So,
I think if I'm not wrong, that I've heard that, and it should be almost fitting that a lot of people or things that are alive, they also think the book are alive, they are in, and more like their house, it's dead, so it's in hund, in tier.
Right. Yeah, there could be some, I'm sure there are rules.
But yeah,
If you look them up, I just
certainly
find
the
that,
exceptions.
right. I just find it hard to remember all these kind of rules. I'd rather just
Yeah.
learn the gender when you learn the word
We
anyway.
don't think about it.
Right, yeah, exactly. You don't really think about it. So the really good news about grammar, and the reason why it's so simple, is because there's no verb conjugation based in the speaker. So in English, if I had to say I am, and I say you are, it changes. But in Danish, it's I are, you are, he are, she are. It's exactly the same for any person. In the present tense, of course. It's also the same for every person in the past tense. That's just the only change that happens. So I have an example here. I run, you run, we run. Jeg løber, du løber, vi løber. I guess this is kind of a bad example, actually. It's my bad. But then it does change when you're doing I run, I ran, like English. That's English. And then jeg løber is the present tense. Jeg løb is the past tense. And this is irregular. And the problem with, I guess, the counter is that there are so many irregular verbs. In English, there are a fairly high number of regular verbs, actually. But in Danish, there's so many irregular, they're almost all irregular, actually. And that makes it hard to learn. But at least you don't have to, when you're speaking it, don't have to worry about the speaker in the sentence, the subject, who is actually doing or saying the things that happens. So that's kind of the 5-minute grammar course, and it probably took a little bit longer, but I hope that it answered maybe some of the, or maybe it didn't answer any question you had, but there's a little bit of everything. That's my aim. And now we get to the pronunciation, which is kind of the core thing about this. And I want to show you a movie, well, it's not a movie, it's a little film clip from a Norwegian TV channel. And I don't know the show actually, but it's a group of comedians, and they make sketches. So any kind of sketch show in Europe, home country, you can relate that to maybe. And what they do is they took the Mickey, or they made fun of Danish language. And of course this is like, it's a joke, so they're exaggerating, but the reason we watch it, I'll come back to that, but basically, when you have to find out something about something, it's always nice to hear it from people who are close, but not actually in the circle, you know what I mean? So I find this a great example of what's happening to Danish right now, and it's only a few minutes, so I think we should just see it. It's also quite funny if you have any kind of relation to it. I think if I press the button, it should play. There's no sound though, that's a problem. Sorry about that. Go back. I guess we can use these marvelous speakers. It's playing the video. there's only one. Okay, it's gonna do a little. Just gonna play it directly. Might make it better. Might be the PowerPoint that's messing it up. Oh well, that's a shame. Technology failing, nothing new of course. Just a little bit.
Does it work on the computer? Could we try to strain our
Yeah, I can
close
check.
the window?
Right. Doesn't actually. There's not, the sound is not muted. And it appears to be playing, but it isn't. That's a mystery. It says heute test, but it's clearly playing. Alright, never mind. But I'll figure out a way to show it to you today or send you the link. It was just a little funny piece anyway. It's not imperative for the presentation. Of course, it sucks to hype something and then it doesn't work, but well then.
Maybe we can just act it out.
Did you remember the lines? No.
Well, aren't they just Cavalloso?
Cavalloso. No, they build it up quite nicely.
Stop hyping it up.
Yeah, sorry. We can see it. If anyone could do lip reading in Norwegian, we could really understand it. No, speaking of pronunciation, it's important that we touch on dialects. Of course, you're all familiar with this, but the thing with Denmark that's quite unique is that we're only 6 million people, and the country's quite small. I'm sure you've seen it on a map or something and thought that's not very big. But in this case, it's more like the size doesn't matter. Because we have a ton of dialects, and they're kind of organized in 3 main dialects. And they are Umo, which translates to island, talk or speak. Mål is like, if you say modersmål, that means mother tongue. Because tongue is a good translation. So it would be island tongue, spoken on the islands. But they are mostly all islands actually. It's only a big part of Jylland that's not an island, so a bit weird. But Jysk comes from Jylland. And I'll show you a map in just a second. Broholm is the little tiny island very close to Sweden, very close to Germany. It's a very eastern part. And you're going to hear someone from Broholm speak in just a second. If we could have audio. Yeah. I might get technical assistance at the end of it, but anyway. Examples of these sub-dialects that go into it, this could be Vestjyllandsk, for instance. If you know the Copenhagen, the island in Copenhagen, it's called Zealand, and then Danish is Sjælland. And Vestjylland, obviously, Western Zealand. And that's different from Copenhagen, which is only about 100 kilometers away. Even if I show you the map here, here it is. You can see that Copenhagen, somewhere in here, somewhere. There's not that far from there to there where it changes like definition. And of course, you know, there's not big, just because the color changes doesn't mean that they speak differently on either side of this line. But it's a general distinction. And these are some of all the kind of the different sub-dialects there are. And the further away you get, the more advanced or more different it will be. So Broholm is all the way up here and sounds very distinct. It's almost like Swedish actually. Swedish Danish. But it is their own dialect. And then you have Jutland here, and the more west and more north you come, the more kind of indistinguishable it becomes. And that's just to show that even in such a small country, there's an incredible diversity in pronunciation. And that provides a huge problem for like someone like myself who's willing to teach people Danish. because they might have heard something in a dialect, and it's not a strong dialect like the difference between Swiss German or a normal German, but it is quite different. And it's like, how do you teach people to pronounce a language that has so many dialects in such a small geographical space? So I thought that was kind of interesting. So what people usually do is they go for Copenhagen Danish, Rigsdansk, like the Empire Danish, so to speak. And that's what I usually end up teaching people. But the problem is, if you go to live in Aarhus, which is a very popular city, I guess it's around here somewhere, and you go to live there, you're going to hear much different Danish than what I'm speaking. So should I then perhaps try to integrate that in the kind of the tutoring, or should I just keep it to the? I guess you can compare it to Hochdeutsch, if you know what that means. Like, it's the official German. And that's kind of the same in Danish. You have Hochdeutsch, they speak on the news and stuff like that. And that was the dialect. So lots of dialects, and if you go to different parts of Denmark, you get very different impressions of the Danish language. So be warned that if you hear someone speak on Broholm, that's not an indicator of the rest of the rest of the Danish language. It's just a kind of a variant way of saying it. And here are some more sounds we cannot hear, which is annoying. I think I'll just go and talk to them, if you don't mind a 2-minute break, because we still have time. And
Do you want me to go?
Oh, do you mind?
Talk about it.
Keep talking about it. Right, get technical help, technical assistance. I don't know why this isn't working, because it was plugged into some other things. Alright, so we'll come back to the sounds in a second. The problems that new students have, new students of Danish, and here's actually an interesting problem in Danish when you're translating. If you say problems for new learners, then the direct translation would be problems for new lærere, but that means teachers. So what do you use? Students, studerende. But studerende has this kind of subtext of at a school or something. So do you rewrite it, or I mean, it is a problem in these kind of languages that when you have words available that look like they're the right ones in translation, they might end up giving a completely different meaning. Now, if you said problems for new lærere, it would be problems for new teachers, right? Hello.
Hi, I heard you have troubles with the sound.
I do. I can't get the sound to work on my laptop, and it's embarrassing, but that's the name of the game. So I can't even get it to speak out of there, actually. It's a bit of a problem. And I'm trying to recording units here. And it does seem when you it's playing, is it something physical?
Looks like it should be right.
Yeah, shouldn't it? Alright, thank you. Never tried this before. No problem. I'll figure something out so you can watch all these great movies. Well, one movie and a few different sound clips, sound bites. It's So I was talking about the problems that new learners might face, and I was thinking maybe if you started learning this kind of seriously, you would be maybe prepared for some of these problems. And the pronunciation variations, as I mentioned, is definitely a big part of it. Untitled variation. I don't know if that's similar to Norwegian. Probably could be.
Untitled variation.
There you go. And the problem is that the sounds are almost similar, which I mentioned in the introduction. Like they say like, and it's almost like, and it's all these kind of approximations of sound, but it's not actual it's not, you can't translate sounds in that way, and it makes it really difficult. A thing that I often hear is that it's a very throaty language. So if I say Broholm, it comes from the throat. And that puts some people off somehow. Somehow, yeah. I don't know why. I think it sounds low. Now, I can see why people don't like it, but once you get into it, like, and you understand how it works, and you maybe can reproduce it yourself, I think it's fine. I mean, it just takes getting used to it. It's like Dutch. You know, Dutch can also sound like that sometimes. And when you get into it, it's a completely different experience than when you just look from the outside. The glottal stop is something that also gives people big problems, and you'll find this, and I'll give you a tip that I've found with my students, is that when you have the Danish word hiller, a lot of people might be kind of thinking, well, should it be hidder, like dd? But when these are in the middle of a word, they're usually soft, or even not even pronounced. So instead of trying to pronounce the d's, try to pronounce them less. So it's hiller, hiller. It's almost like I'm cutting away one of the d's, kind of just continuing the syllable without kind of ignoring it a little bit. I'm leaving one D out. So when you get words that look like D that has the double D, and it's quite common actually, don't try and pronounce two Ds, just kind of move on. Kind of cut the syllable in the middle, say hilda, hilda. And that will make it much smoother and make it better than try to say hilda, 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 which you could be kind of inclined to do. Yes, sir?
Does the stud in Danish appear between two consonants only?
Good question. Good question. I don't actually know the answer to that. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not so much into the actual working technicalities of the language, but yeah, I would think so. That'd be right. Do you know?
How do you pronounce light? Like
Lys.
yeah. Do you have a stud?
No. Lys. That's pretty straightforward.
How about the verb?
Lyser?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit there, I guess. So that's between a vowel and a consonant. So I guess we just disproved it.
Yeah.
I hope did you get the answer? Then apparently it does exist.
But the stud can be the end of the word also, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Can be on the beginning of the word.
That seems pretty rare for me. What's that? Møde? No. I don't think this at the beginning. It might be the second syllable, but I don't. At the beginning, I'm not sure. But it's probably a little bit technical anyway.
Yeah.
And the trouble letters, especially the consonants. Of course, the vowels are a problem because you have all these different ways of saying A and E and O and U and U. But the biggest problem consonants are D and G. I don't know if you find the same in Norwegian or if that's the consonant people have trouble with, but it definitely is in Danish. Because if you compare the difference between saying guarantee, there's a g, like you would use in English, but then you have the ending of the word Monday is Monday. It's not good, it's Monday. It's just kind of in the IPA they usually call this like the spark, the kind of neutral vowel sound. And it just flows together. And the other with the D, you have David, which in Danish would be David. So again, and at the end of a word comes well. So it's different, but it's a subtle difference. And if you hear me say it, you might not think there's a difference. It's kind of like the Russian different ways of saying sure and Poland. I've learned this in conference, but I don't want to make it too many tips about that. So that was some helpful tips, and now it's your turn, because now you've had amazing practice and you know everything. And I don't know if you guys just want to stand up a second for a second. Just stand up, everyone. Just shake a little bit, you know, get listening to me go on about Danish grammar. And we're going to try to say this. If you're really good at it, are you good at it? Yeah. Try to say it. Okay. Okay, stay. You can practice. I'll say it once now, and then you repeat it, and then we'll go through it, and then hopefully at the end we'll all be really good at it. So I say, grød med fløde. Sounds perfect already. So could you feel that the problem areas are like obviously the claws stop. And D, G, and D. Can you feel that's where you kind of you have to focus a little harder to get the right sound. And also the nil. A lot of people have trouble with that. Nil. But let's break it down. So if you want to say rød, say it very well. You can't. How you sing it? How you sing it? Rød. Rød. Yeah, exactly. How are you guys saying? Yes. Yes, perfect. Yeah, you're good. You're all good. Fantastic. So let's move on to the second part of the puzzle. And by the way, if you're interested in what this means, it's not just gibberish. It's a lovely dish where you take like red berries, which could be strawberries, it could be raspberries, and you just pour a lot of cream on it. So it's like a dessert, and it's very lovely to something. There we go. Okay. Close. Good. Maybe a little bit less pronounced in the G, so close. Better. I'm just gonna go with that. So. You're terrible. Yeah, you're good. I'm just joking. Well. Yeah.
The last part's mostly very
Exactly.
okay.
Cool. So it's like kind of generic consonant sound.
It touches your palate, but
Exactly.
it doesn't stay there.
Yeah. How do you guys sing? Cool. Try to say the D at the end, just touch it. Cool. Put the tongue a bit. Cool. Good. That's good. That's about time. Cool. Yes. That's perfect. Do you see any similarities with some of these sounds and some of the Scots? Do you have any? No. Damn! Such a shame. Such a shame. All right. Okay. Mill. You can do this. Mill.
That's the only thing you heard.
That actually sounds good. Mill. Is anyone finding this hard? The mill.
Here, are you saying like
Is the D at the end similar to the English like TH like
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's okay to exaggerate because Danish people, when they speak and you don't know the language, it sounds like they're exaggerating all the time. It's like, so if you feel like that helps you, feel free to do that. So mill, 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 mill. Try to exaggerate the insult.
It's like it sounds like L.
yeah, here L2.
Right. What's that?
Here L2. I
Yeah,
know.
sounds like
Come
You
close.
hear else? Okay. So mill.
You hear a lot of things.
Mill.
Yes.
I'm saying
Yes,
L.
it's very close. The D and the L are
Yeah,
very close
they
to
are.
that point.
They are very close.
Tiny, tiny bit.
I haven't been here yet. Yes. And good exaggeration. Yes. Perfect. You got, yeah, I bet you.
L.
Okay, so we're almost there. The second part is cream and fløde.
If you could do it, think about it.
Perfect. And you had to teach me. Okay. I'm not going to come around and listen to that because that actually sounds really good. So let's try to say it together as a whole. And then if I hear any problems, I'll just so rød med fløde. Ready? Rød. Mill. Fløde. Give yourself a round of applause. You can sit down now. And you will, if you go to Denmark and meet a Danish person on the street, you will be asked to say this. So remember all the tricks in the book. And All right, it's just before we go on to the Q&A, we still have a few minutes. I'll do this quickly. And I just said accentuate, because that's how Danish people naturally speak. And there's this problem, I've heard it in other talks about when you're trying to sound like a native, it sounds like you're mocking them. In a way when you I'm doing this with Russian when I'm speaking with my Russian tutor, it sometimes feels like I'm doing too much, like trying to be too Russian in a way, so that I'm worried that she might say, what are you doing really? But in Danish, don't worry about that, because Danish people have that kind of way of speaking. But on the same note though, I do want to say, relax. Danish people are quite relaxed and down to earth. And this is particularly with the word, the pattern of sound. So if you notice a Frenchman speaking, he's doing like this all the time. But a Danish speech is more like, kind of flows downwards. So when we finish a sentence, we usually down. So if you want to say a word and you're not sure about how to say it, just relax. Relax. Don't try to tense up your throat or your tongue or anything, and it will sound more Danish. And practice, 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 of course. And again, this is a trouble translation, just for those who are interested. I know some of you are a little bit better at Danish. Practice. If you want to translate it, you should probably say which is the kind of what do you call it, the byde form, which is the kind of the commanding, like do this. The imperative, thank you. And but again, sounds pretty bad. So is like oh. So I put to it, but that kind of means like the act of doing a practice, or like a military practice, when you're doing a drill or something. So it is a problematic thing to translate from Danish, but you can always rewrite it. But obviously, in a presentation, you can't just change the sentences, the structure. That would be, then you wouldn't be able to kind of see the direct translation. I could write a sentence about it, or a PhD, but yeah, for now, this is what you're going to get. And the thing I want to say about Danish culture, and these two are kind of connected, is that Danes are quite reserved. We're, Northern Europe, it's cold weather, we're kind of inside a lot. And we're not like Italians or other kind of Southern European languages, but they're very extroverted, and they just go and they just introduce themselves and they go like that. Danish people are very reserved, and it can be misunderstood as cold, but that's not true. If somebody comes up to me, I'll happily embrace them like a member of my family. But I'm unlikely to do the initiation myself, at least in Denmark. I mean, when I'm here at a Polyglot conference, obviously it's different. But if I'm on the street or in a bar or something, so know that Danish people are not, ice queens or ice kings. That's just kind of how they are. And if you do go talk to them, you'll find out immediately that they're just as nice as everyone else. But with language learning particularly, that does make it hard to practice. And there's another aspect that every Dane speaks English, and quite well usually. So that means if you go up and say, "Goddag, hvad hedder du?" they might say, "My name is Johan," or something. They might just switch to English immediately, recognizing that you're a foreigner. And somebody gave a great tip at another talk, and he said, "Just say, I understand the English." Because then what can they do? I mean, most Danes won't have another language, so they'll be forced to it. And I think it's a little bit kind of deceitful, but I think it's okay. It's like a little hack.
But it will probably work, yeah.
Yeah, it will. I'm sure it will. But yeah, that you will encounter that, and I've heard it from everyone that if there's a foreigner that comes up to you and tries to speak Danish, it's kind of a courtesy, but it's also kind of you're not really good enough at my language yet. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword kind of thing. I know I've done this as well, and I feel guilty for it, but you also have to realize that a lot of people are working. So if you're in a bar or something, and you're taking 10 minutes to say a sentence, that person probably has other people to serve, and they're just doing their job. They're not kind of your personal private tutors. And so don't take it as a personal offense if they say, "Sorry, I have other things to do, I can't stand here and talk to you for hours." But we are nice people, I promise. And that's about it from me, and anything from you. We still have a few minutes if you have any questions or concerns. Yes?
Yes, let me try to explain myself so it would be easier. I'm a Brazilian, so naturally I speak Portuguese, and I also speak Spanish. And some people that don't know those languages, they say that they sound similar, like, no,
Yeah.
but they are practically the same, okay? But if we speak naturally with a Spanish person or a Latin person that is not Brazilian,
Right.
they simply cannot understand us unless we speak very slowly and showing things, and vice versa.
Right.
So my question is, I don't know how to ask this. For example, you told us that you talked to him but you talked in a natural way.
Right. Yes.
So, but you also told us that in some parts of Denmark, you can get like 50% of this.
Yeah.
So I don't know what my question is.
I think I know.
Are the three of them basically, are the three of them really like different languages,
Right.
or are they, like, how come you can understand him but not understand your
Right.
own language? Like, is this only geographical? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question, and the question is, it depends on where you're from. Like, I'm from a place in Denmark that speaks quite normal kind of, the hook Danish, if you want to use that term, and that's why he can understand with no problem. If I came from Broholm, I mean, even Danish people can struggle with Broholm a little bit, but it sounds kind of like Swedish. So if you were Swedish, you probably understand more. I haven't heard about this, but
I
is that
yeah,
true?
understand
But-
things from Broholm.
Oh, really?
No other things.
Oh,
Yes, but the thing is that, like, what I cannot understand is, like, for example, maybe in my mind, maybe this could be like, I don't know, like Spanish from Spain and Mexican Spain. Like,
Right.
I cannot
These are
see
different
how come.
languages.
Yes, why are they different? So I cannot understand this.
I don't know. They're just very
I'm asking
different.
this because I'm totally
Right,
ignorant of this part.
Yeah, exactly. And I just don't. There's no kind of explanation. It just is so different that we don't understand.
So how come you know that this person that you do not understand, for example? How come you know that this person that you don't understand is speaking, for example, your language or her language, for example?
Well, if you ask them to write it down, then you can very easily see that it's the same.
Just writing, but speaking, I cannot understand you, but
But
I don't know which language you are speaking.
95% of the words, the vocabulary will be shared. It's just the pronunciation. But they will use 5% different words, kind of like Danish and Swedish, where they're very similar except for pronunciation, and then Swedish has another vocabulary. Not to say that they don't understand the vocabulary of Danish people, but they use different words for different things. Like a good example, if I have one, is so. Uli, yeah, for instance, yeah. People wouldn't say. Or I guess we would say if you snakker du dansk, Swedish would say maybe, and Norwegian would say
But we
something.
still have
You
the
can
word
use both.
snacka.
Yeah, exactly. They understand. We understand each other. It's just what we use in everyday life. So it's usually synonyms. But you're right in the sense that it's kind of unique for such a small language to have such a distinction between dialects. And I mean, you could consider Broholm a language, I suppose, but they are within Danish control. They are under the same language jurisdiction.
There is a political thing involved on this too, or not? Like, what I mean is, like, maybe if you cannot understand most of the part of the things from a Danish person, but you can understand her, so maybe imaginary bridge, for example. No, so this is going to be Denmark, and this like maybe it's a kind of a political thing.
I would say it's more, I mean, from my standpoint, you probably know way more about this from the head of speech this morning, but when someone speaks Danish or Norwegian to me, it's like somebody who's speaking really bad English. All their grammar is wrong. They use these really strange words where I can kind of understand what they mean, but it's not the word that I would use.
Exactly.
But the difference is that they're actually speaking a correct language.
Yeah.
So when I speak to
It's like a correct language for them, like a wrong language for you.
Yeah, it's just like someone who's really, really bad at Swedish. All their grammar is wrong, all their vocabulary is wrong, but apparently in their world it's correct.
Isn't that like what Pidgin English is?
No, that would be quite different, I would say.
But like,
Pidgin is like, give me a round thing that holds liquid to describe a bottle.
okay.
And it's a little bit different from having two very distinct languages that kind of understand each other based not on the description of the words but the actual words. And like I said, I understand Norwegian when a Norwegian speaks to me. It has to be certain dialects, so not all of the dialects. But mostly you'll find that the people you meet, like in a foreign setting, usually has the easy to understand dialect. I don't know why that is, but it's just my experience. But if I talk to a Swedish person, I really need to concentrate and really use my imagination and ask them to repeat and slow down. But still, I've never studied Swedish in my life. I've never seen a Swedish television program. I've never heard Swedish radio. So I still kind of understand it. That's pretty impressive, I think. I know we're running over for the dinner, but if you have a last question maybe?
I didn't have a question.
Oh.
I just wanted to add something.
Yeah, sure.
Because some of the words you use in Danish now are actually like old Swedish words.
Oh, really?
So that's probably why we can recognize a bit more.
Yeah.
And a lot of the words we use in Sweden today are old Danish words. So we have some kind of common history where we recognize a bit more.
I think
a Danish
the
friend that thought she used
pronunciation
some
might
really
be the
good
way.
words that sound good in school, but she was.
Yeah.
I realized now after moving to Denmark that those are actually normal Danish words.
I think if it wasn't for the pronunciation, it would not be so hard.
Yeah, the Danish are
Because
hard to pronounce.
because it is easier for Swedish people or people who learn Swedish to understand Norwegians, but it's more difficult to understand Danish people. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a question of listening more or
The Danish pronunciation makes it hard.
Yeah,
putting a bit more attention into the language, and then it might be doable for speakers of other Scandinavian languages to understand also Danish.
Oh yeah.
And in the south we are more used to Danish television.
That was a quick presentation. But I hope that some of you were, at least maybe a little bit inspired to look into it more. And I hope that some of you who might know some of it already can continue with it, because it's a wonderful language, I think. Anyway, and it's very unique.
I agree.
Yeah, there you go. The Norwegian agrees. So that's it.
I just wanted to say I don't speak any Danish or Swedish, and usually my brain kind of shuts down when I hear them because I just hear all these weird sounds. But what has changed this for me, and maybe since you guys are all such a passionate bunch, I started watching this TV show that is amazing. It's called The Bridge.
Yes.
That's a Swedish-Danish collaboration, actually. So if you're
I
interested
know.
in both, then you
I
guys
was just
can-
about to, advertise.
Oh,
Is it Broholm?
Broholm in Danish, yeah.
Broholm and
Yeah.
Broholm? Yeah, see that in Finnish. Anyway.
Well, we
Which
call it
is a
Finnish.
feature, but I watch it with the subtitles. So it's about a police collaboration between Denmark and Sweden.
Right.
And they're it's bilingual the whole time. So it's almost like you don't even notice that there's Danish and Swedish.
Right.
It's just new. And then you later start to notice that one person will say something and the other one will pronounce it completely differently, and then you're suddenly aware that there's a whole language difference.
Right.
And it's just a really amazing show, especially for us really
But
very
then
passionate
there
people.
are really lots of funny situations in this show actually that come from the Danish detective and the Swedish detective. They have to work together, and and they don't really understand each other. So they do sort of, but often not. And then towards the end it gets better, but also there are more episodes, and in the beginning it's a bit hard for them.
But in the meantime, you start to get used to the sounds of the language, and you're so engrossed in the plot, you don't even notice. And suddenly you're like, this is so beautiful. And then
And if you
wonder
know
what happened.
Swedish and want an introduction to Danish or vice versa, that's probably a good source to go, because you get kind of softly build up to it. But I think we should all go and have some dinner now and talk. Well done, Phil.